Well, welcome. I really was a little pessimistic about tonight because I thought it was going to be a small crowd because the snowstorm is coming. But you're one last fling before the snow. So great. Now, you may or may not know I'm a teacher, and teachers like to teach. So what I always do before I present something to my class is I always give them some questions to think about before I actually do the presentation. So I'm going to give you some questions to think about. They're rhetorical questions, so don't answer, but you can just think. Like, when was McCracken County formed? Now that one, this is the bicentennial, so I think you can figure out what year it was formed, okay? For whom was it named? We'll find that out when we're finished. You should know all of this. Do you know anything about its namesake? All right. Obviously, the name was McCracken, yes. Was this person from Western Kentucky or even from Kentucky? Did he ever set foot in McCracken County? The answers to these and other questions can be answered if you pay attention. There will be a test afterwards. Oh, I'm sorry, that's my teacher mode. All right. Anyway, all right, so we are ready. And let's see if this works. Oh, great, okay. Now, whether we use 2024 for the bicentennial of McCracken County, since the county was really established on December 17th, 1824, or whether we use the county's establishment when it became effective, which was January 15th, 1825, we can just say, well, the bicentennial is upon us, one way or the other. I actually had this script written in 2024. So, the beginnings of McCracken County start with the treaty that is now formed Jackson Purchase. Now, this letter from Secretary of State George Graham, dated October 25th, 1817, was addressed to General Andrew Jackson, directing him to ascertain whether a negotiation can be entered to obtain land from the Chickasaw. It requested Jackson to check whether this could be checked out to see if the Chickasaws to result in a favorable termination of their claim of lands held by them, particularly in Kentucky. Now, Andrew Jackson and Isaac Shelby, now Isaac Shelby was the first governor of Kentucky and also the fifth governor of Kentucky, they negotiated with the Chickasaw. And on October 19th, 1818, a treaty was signed by Jackson and Shelby and a man named Levi Colbert. Now you can see Jackson's signature there and Shelby's and Levi Colbert. Now his name, Colbert, his father was Scotch and his mother was Chickasaw, so that's how he gets in on this, because he represented the king of the Chickasaw Nation. Now at the signing, a peace pipe was smoked. This is the actual peace pipe smoked during that ceremony. It had been in the Shelby family for almost 120 years, and they donated it to the Kentucky Historical Society. A statement of the pipe states that the pipe was used in the peace signing and was given as the sacred seals of the tribe. Now, Colbert remarked in this letter, "We have made a good treaty. We are observing everyone now satisfied with the claims of our white brothers, which we can live in peace and friendship." Yeah. The treaty was signed not in what we consider the Jackson Purchase, but rather in Monroe County, Mississippi, under a large oak known as the Chickasaw Council Tree. Now, besides Jackson and Shelby, Colbert, the treaty was signed by the use of an X by Chinubby. Ever hear of Chinubby? He was the king of the Chickasaw Nation, as well as other chiefs and warriors who set their hands and seals, that's what it was called, to the treaty. Notice the blend of English names and Chickasaw names on the document. I mean, I see a William McGillery and a James Brown, not the singer, and also many other Indian names, which I don't even want to attempt to try to pronounce. But the X was considered legal as the signers representing the Chickasaw did not write in the English language. So that is the actual treaty you are seeing here, or part of it. Now, up to that time, in the early 1800s, Livingston County claimed the land as part of their county. it being called in some references as Old Livingston County. On old maps, such as this one here, was used in 1804 and 1816, it referred to Livingston County. As you can see, it spreads all the way across where is now McCracken County. However, since this treaty, or since this was made before 1818, well, and that's when the Jackson Purchase happened, the land was actually owned by the Chickasaw. So I don't know why Livingston County was claiming it. It wasn't theirs to claim. Now this map was made in 1818, the year of the treaty, and Livingston County's name is no longer on the land rather. Note that there's a small part there, you may not be able to read it, but it states, land to which the Indian title is lately extinguished. Also notice the Walker boundary on the bottom there to the south, and that would later change to include more Kentucky land after negotiations with Tennessee. That's why you see Kentucky's border going like this all the way across, and then goes whoop, like that, because of that dispute they had over there. The land started to be sold in 1821. The first settlers came to what would be called Paducah. Princeton, as well as Wadesboro, which was in Callaway County, became the land offices to purchase land in the Jackson Purchase. However, in 1821, Jackson Purchase land was also deeded in Salem in Livingston County. In fact, the first land deed, deeded from Pekin, which is what it was called before Paducah, in the Livingston County deeds was on May in 1821 for several lots in the village, as it says there, the village of Pekin, later to be named Paducah by William Clark. It was deeded to a man named Andrew Frazier, who 4 years later sold it, and that became the first deed in the deed books in McCracken County deed books. I went down that old little vault and looked at the deed books, and that was number one, that very one. Now, this is the location in Paducah of one of the very first lots mentioned on that 1821, which is lot number 59. Now, it was partial of those lots bought in 1821, as mentioned. The first deed in the McCracken County Courthouse. It is now part of the Market House Theater's box office, that spot. We now know the beginnings of the Jackson Purchase, so now let's discuss the formation of McCracken County. You can't do that without knowing the beginning of the beginning. After the Jackson Purchase was established and Livingston County no longer called that as part of their county, the establishment of counties and their names commenced. But what were those counties? When were they established? And how were they named? Well, to do that, we have to go back to the War of 1812, also known as the Second War of Great Britain, and a man named Virgil McCracken. Virgil McCracken was born in what is now Woodford County on June 7th, 1778. Now, his father, Cyrus, who sometimes the name McCracken was spelled with an I-N and sometimes an E-N. It just depends on who signed it and who wrote it. Cyrus, his father, came to Kentucky in 1775 as a surveyor for the Ohio Land Company and was one of the earliest settlers in the area to become a permanent settler in the state. He was the first permanent settler in the state among his group. He and a man named Hancock Lee founded Leestown just north of Frankfort. Now, Cyrus McCracken built one of the very first stone houses in Kentucky, which still stands. One story states that Cyrus McCracken fought in the Revolutionary War under General George Rogers Clark. Now, this is a great tie-in with what is now McCracken County, as Clark owned thousands of acres here in western Kentucky. As shown on this document, the brothers together, between William Clark and George Rogers Clark, accumulated 74,000 acres in this area. This is one of those rare finds. I was in the Livingston County Courthouse, and I was going through some records, and there was just an old accordion-style file box, and I started going through all these loose papers, and I came to this, and I said, whoa, George Rogers Clark, and William Clark, and it's talking about the mouth of the Tennessee, where McCracken was formed. That was really something. Well, so I'd like to tell you a little bit more about him, because he was reportedly, the father, Cyrus, he reportedly died from injuries in the war in 1782, and was buried, as it put, near a blockhouse on the mouth of the Licking River on the Kentucky side, was the quote. Virgil's mother, now a widow, raised her 4 children when Virgil was just 5 years old. However, there's another story that says that Cyrus lived on until 1795, dying after being thrown off from a horse. I'll take the more heroic story for now. The family operated a mill operated by water power. It had massive stone walls with living quarters, which were added later on, and that was above the mill. It can still be found in Woodford County on a road called McCracken Mill, 3 miles from Versailles in central Kentucky. Now, Virgil McCracken married Sally Caldwell in 1800 in Woodford County. Now, notice his signature. I kind of enlarged it here. What do you notice about it? I-N, right? He himself signed it with an I-N. And through different records, it fluctuates from the I-N to the E-N. Well, the couple had 5 children, but in 1810, Sally died, and leaving Virgil to raise the children on his own. McCracken was elected and represented Woodford County in the lower house of the legislature in 1810 and 1811, which kept him busy. So, in October of 1812, he remarried and brought his new wife home to take care of his children, who were all under the age of 12. Virgil was named for his uncle, who died in 1780. He has been described as an intelligent, patriotic, and fearless man. Now, with the outbreak of the War of Great Britain, he raised a company and joined with Lieutenant Colonel John Allen's group and was known as the 1st Rifle Regiment of Kentucky. McCracken was commissioned as a captain on June 13, 1812. He was 34 years old. Then, in August of 1812, McCracken assembled a regiment of over 2,000 men and marched from Georgetown in central Kentucky to Newport, which is right across the river from Cincinnati. They marched in the pouring rain when he heard about the capture of Detroit. This journey took them 6 days. Arriving at Newport, they learned that General Hull, William Hull, had surrendered the U.S. fort at Detroit to the British. They had to cross the Ohio River near that little village called Cincinnati. Not an easy task to cross the Ohio River there, hoping to regain their territory, marching on to Dayton and reaching Fort Wayne on September 12th. Now, with little or no training, but much patriotism, the group had marched through hundreds of miles north, through mosquito-infested swamps. Once at Fort Wayne, they saved that fort from an Indian attack. On September 25th, a team of 5 spies went ahead to scope out the situation. Near Fort Defiance in Ohio, they were accosted by Indians, viciously attacked, scalped, and killed. Allen's men, including McCracken's regiment, reached Fort Defiance and waited supplies. It was a miserable time there, and there was a scarcity of food and clothing, and it was unseasonably cold and rainy winter months. The troop remained cold and hungry as supplies sent from Kentucky were delayed due to the inclement weather and Indian attacks. Finally, in December, supplies arrived and the march to Detroit was resumed. Well, by the time they reached the Detroit area, winter had already set in and the conditions were harsh. Now remember, these men left in summer in central Kentucky. They were ill prepared for the harsh winters in the Detroit area. It was January in 1813, faced with 2 feet of snow. Now, we're not going to get that tonight, don't worry. No warm clothing, limited guns, limited ammunition, very little food. These Kentuckians took on the British and their allies, the Indians. Faced with both the British and their Indian allies, as well as being able to prepare, like I said. But their first assault was victorious. However, there's always a however. On January 22nd, 1813, a furious assault came upon the camped forces made by the British and the Indians. The Americans were completely defeated. Many of the Kentuckians, including Colonel John Allen, were killed and scalped. And by the way, you'll see this later on, but Allen County, Kentucky was named after him. Many were badly wounded, including Captain McCracken. But there was no choice. Surrender. 397 Americans lost their lives there. The British carried off 547 prisoners to Canada, while the wounded, which numbered around 65, were left at Frenchtown with the promise that sleds would be sent back to transport them to Canada. Captain McCracken was one of them left behind. After the British left, groups of Indians came and proceeded to plunder the buildings and slaughter and scalp the wounded. Very few Americans escaped, but most were either murdered or burned alive when the Indians set fire to all the dwellings in the village. It was the highest number of Americans killed in a single battle in the War of 1812. Virgil's brother Ovid managed to survive. He had been assigned after the first battle to go back for supplies. A cousin, Otho, also escaped, but Virgil McCracken did not survive the massacre. Now, Ensign Isaac Baker, in his report to General Winchester on February 25, 1813, noted that at about the 10th of that month, quote, an Indian brought Captain McCracken's commission to me, and the paper was bloody, unquote. He alluded that when the Indian stripped and examined the captain, that he found an Indian scalp on him, which caused the Indian to kill him. Was this so? Or did the Indian, telling this, try to screen himself from barbarity? The captain's character and danger of him carrying such a thing on his person in a disastrous battle suggests that probably the Indian was lying. Captain McCracken's name was now on the list of casualties from the battle, and in April of that year that he died, Captain McCracken's will was probated in Woodford County. He left a wife and 4 children. Bland Ballard. I bet that name sounds so familiar to everybody. He survived the battle. He lived to the age of 91. He died in 1853. He was in the battle too. Ballard County, of course, was named after him, with the county seat at that time anyway, Blandville. Bland Ballard. They got to use both his first and his last name. Ballard is one of the very few who did survive. Now, among the casualties, aside from Captain McCracken, were Pascal Hickman and Benjamin Franklin Graves. Can you see where I'm going with this? All 3 were listed on the original report as casualties in 1813. So you can see that it was also called Battle of Frenchtown, but it also says Battle of the River Raisin, which is where it was actually fought. But they also called it Winchester's defeat. I'm sure General Winchester didn't like that. Well, anyway, he was on that list of casualties. Now, all 3 are listed in this original report of casualties. McCracken and Hickman are listed as killed, while Graves, on the other column, is listed as wounded, but he later died on the trail because he was a prisoner of war. And if you were a prisoner of war and you couldn't keep up, they killed you. Now, a monument was erected in Frankfort Cemetery in Frankfort to honor some of those killed in the Battle of the River Raisin, including McCracken and Hickman and Graves. Altogether, there are 9 counties in Kentucky named after soldiers who served in or lost their lives in that battle, including the counties of Meade, formed the same year as McCracken County and named for Captain James Meade, or Allen County, formed in 1815, named after, as we said, Colonel Allen, who was killed leading McCracken's 1st Regiment, Or Hart County, formed in 1819 and named after Captain Nathaniel Hart, who was wounded at the Frenchtown Battle and died at the massacre at the River Raisin along with Captain McCracken. Then there's Simpson County, formed in 1819, named after Captain John Simpson, who was killed at the Battle of the River Raisin. And finally, Edmondson County, formed in 1825 and named after Captain Jack Emerson, who was killed in the Battle of Frenchtown. Can you believe that? 9 counties named after that one battle. People lost their lives or were in that one battle. Now that we have the background of Captain McCracken and how the war affected the naming of some of these counties, let's advance 5 years from the war to 1818, which, as you know, is when the Jackson Purchase was made, and watch the progression of counties formed from the Jackson Purchase. Now, this 1820 census map shows the Purchase region being part of Livingston to the north and Caldwell County to the south. The Purchase started as one county, Hickman, in 1821. So this area where we are right now was Hickman County at one time. Now, it was named for, of course, Paschal Hickman, who died at the Battle of the River Raisin. But Captain Hickman's county would soon shrink. For as in 1822 came Callaway County, named after Richard Callaway, a frontiersman, a friend of Daniel Boone, who helped him found Boonesboro. The very next year, 1823, came what? Graves County, in honor of Benjamin Franklin Graves, also killed in the battle. The year after that, 1824, came the subject of our presentation, McCracken. Notice how large McCracken was here. Judge, it's not that big anymore. No. Now, if you keep on watching, things are going to be changing dramatically here. So, just 18 years later, McCracken County was cut in half to accommodate Ballard County. Also, if you notice on the other side, Callaway County was cut in half, and Marshall County became a county, named after Chief Justice John Marshall. Now, because of this split of McCracken into Ballard, several of the original deeds from McCracken County are actually now located in Ballard County, at least that section of it, including land that was given to a Major Charles Ewell, which is only one of 2 Revolutionary War soldiers buried here in McCracken County. He's buried in Oak Grove. As Hickman kept decreasing in size, look how it's decreased now. It was cut in 2 to form Fulton County in 1845, named after Robert Fulton, who was given credit for inventing the steamboat. Now the Jackson Purchase looked like it was finished, but wait, there's more, as the commercial says. Only one county is left to form this land. 41 years later, in 1886, the last to join, and the 119th county out of 120, was Carlisle, named after Speaker of the House and Secretary of Treasury John G. Carlisle. Now, as mentioned earlier, according to official records in Frankfort, an act to establish McCracken County was on December 17th, 1824. So that made 2024 the 200th year of McCracken County's being established. But, as I just said, wait, there's more. Population requirements of that day delayed the official establishment of the county until it had enough people, and it didn't become effective until January 15th of 1825. So that's why we actually have kind of 2 bicentennials. Now, the first meeting of the McCracken County Court was on January 17th, the very day of the formation of McCracken County became effective. It was in the small settlement of a place called Wilmington. A group of men met at the house of a man named Isaac Lovelace. Lovelaceville? Wilmington was established near Massac Creek and Maxon Mill. Now, this is an earlier version of what Maxon Mill looked like about a couple of hundred, maybe 100 or so years ago. Wilmington was not even a town yet, and it would be 2 years before the town was even platted, as shown here. Ambitious plans for a town that never really came to fruition as this plat had hoped. In fact, only about 12 homes were ever built there at that time. And note the little circle I did there, that is actually where the first McCracken County courthouse and jail was built, in that little lot, that lot right there, which never actually became all those different lots. And a man in this document here, there were two men here, one named John Fields, the other Luke Sweatman, who owned the building to be used as the Wilmington Courthouse, or the McCracken County Courthouse. And they agreed, as it says here, to furnish the court of this county with house, room, water, fires, light, until they can build such a courthouse. And they were paid each month for that. The settlement was 102 acres, as shown here on this historical marker, which is on the corner of Wilmington Road and Kentucky 358, which is near where Wilmington was. Little is left of Wilmington today, except for these two markers commemorating the first county seat of McCracken County. The Boulder Monument was erected there in 1925. That date ring a bell? 1925? That would have been the centennial of McCracken County. After the first meeting at Isaac Lovelace's, the court, without an official courthouse, they decided in February to be held at the home of Luke Sweatman, who I just mentioned earlier. And it would continue meeting there for the next several years. The first court records, this is the actual first page of the very first court records in the courthouse, are entitled January Term 1825. This record establishes the justices of the peace and states, quote, agreeable to the provisions of an act establishing the county of McCracken on the southwest of the Tennessee River, approved December 17, 1824, unquote. The first court also appointed a man named Braxton Small, who was born in 1799, as the first county's court clerk, a position he would hold until 1858, over 30 years. We probably don't have many court clerks that last that long now. You'll hear Braxton Small mentioned several times in his presentation. He got his hand into everything. Now, this picture was taken around the centennial in Wilmington, showing a small cabin built on the grounds of Wilmington out of the original logs of the jail at Wilmington. Now, they didn't have all the logs to build the big courthouse, the big jail, but they had a few, so they decided to make a mini jail. They had been used partly to build a barn, but then they were returned to Wilmington to create this commemorative building. Now, getting on with the business of the new county. Now, James Martin was appointed the first sheriff of McCracken County, as approved by the governor. The first coroner was William Glover. However, Glover got into a mess, as shown in this document, when he was charged guilty, quote, of having begotten upon the body of a single woman, being a slave, a female child. Whoa, quite scandalous, end quote. It was ruled that he would pay $30 for 21 months. End of case. Another business was with the new county was keeping records of marriages. On the 21st of March, 1825, the same year, just a couple of months after the establishment of McCracken, marriage number 1 was performed. Duncan Henderson married a widow, Sarah Glennon. Now, getting back to Braxton Small here, Braxton Small, kind of like Braxton likes to brag about some things, the county court clerk. He also married 6 years later, after the Hendersons. He married a woman named Grace Walters, who along with her sister were considered the belles of Kentucky. There's a whole story with them just alone. I can't tell that all now. But the one sister married a man named Valentine Owen. And you know Owen's Island, and that deals with a whole other story. Note the Small wedding was number what? 54. But Small insisted that his was the first marriage in Paducah. Well, technically, he was, even though he's number 54. Because, you know, Pekin had been around for since 1821, and the town was named in 1827, and lots were sold in 1827. But Paducah didn't become an incorporated town until 1830. That's why he can consider himself the first marriage in Paducah after it became an official town. And speaking of the naming of Paducah, I hate to disprove what you may have known all your life. Don't throw things at me. But here's the real story. Now, most Paducans, when asked about the naming of the town, they'll say, "Oh, Chief Paducah, tell about the story of Chief Paducah," as shown in this historical marker, which reads, Chief Paducah, chief of a subtribe of Chickasaw Indians who lived and hunted in this area until Jackson Purchase 1818. Land here was owned by General William Clark, who founded Paducah, named it in honor of the friendly chief. Okay. Chief Paducah has been described as a 7-foot-tall Chickasaw Indian, very muscular, even though he was in his 60s, and who was a good friend of William Clark. Now, Clark was an avid journalist. He never mentioned a Chief Paducah in any of his journals. In fact, here are two more historical markers, which one was found at the old Barclay Airport and the other one on Broadway, testifying that Paducah was named after Chief Paducah. Well, the story goes on that the chief returned to the area to see his good friend Clark. But Clark had changed plans. So on his return back to Mississippi, the chief died, and the Braves returned him to Paducah to be buried. For years, there was a bronze marker on the sidewalk of the east side of South 3rd Street, 50 feet north of Husband's Road. I don't know if any of you ever saw that. I saw it many times. It's not there anymore, though. It read, 200 feet east of this spot was buried the Indian chief Paducah in 1819, for whom the city was named. In fact, in 1874, an unsuccessful effort was made to find the remains in order to bury them in a more prominent place. But you know what? They never did find the remains. Well, I guess it's kind of hard to bury somebody who didn't exist. Oh, well, now I hope I'm not hearing any gasping here. Sorry about that. But now for the real story. When Clark returned to Pekin in 1827, he started selling lots in the town. He wrote to his son, who was named Meriwether Lewis Clark. See who he named it after? Named his son after his buddy that went the Lewis and Clark expedition. Anyway, in this letter, found in the Missouri Historical Society's archives just 40 years ago, Clark tells his son, and I quote, you can see it here, "I have laid out a town there and intend to sell some lots in it. The name is," and notice how he hyphenated it, "Paducah, once the largest nation of Indians known in this country and now almost forgotten." He was referring to the Paducah Indians, a tribe in the southwest part of the United States. Most likely he heard about them on his famous trip to the Pacific with Meriwether Lewis. Now that we put that issue to rest, maybe, let's continue with the early days of the county as recorded in the county records. 1825, times were different. Just 1 month after starting meeting at Luke Sweatman's, remember we got to Luke Sweatman's house, Sweatman was approved to keep a tavern there. Pretty handy for the court, isn't it? I'm not saying the court needed it, but it was there if they did. Early court records show in 1825, James Gibson was appointed the first county attorney. Also, the first two attorneys to practice in McCracken, James Galloway and John Milton, were admitted to practice in the court. At this early point of McCracken, most of the previous records were still in Hickman County, from which McCracken was formed. So an order was made to have the papers and records delivered to the new county. A new county had other problems as well. Ordained ministers were needed to solemnize weddings and to preach. Growing pains, for sure, for the new county. By the end of the year, it was decided that tavern and inn prices should be standardized. Look at some of these charges to the traveler in need of, shall I say, booze and board in 1825. Let's look at some of these prices here. Breakfast, dinner, supper, 25 cents. Lodging, 12 cents per person. Horse feed, 12 cents per horse. They like some of these numbers the same, 12 and on. Half pint of whiskey, 12 cents. Wine, half pint, hey, more class here, 25 cents. But listen to this. Horse for the night, 37 cents per horse. A person was being charged 12 cents, but the horse was 37 cents. So that's pretty interesting how prices have changed on there. Now also, the records in the county courthouse also show the earmarks or brands for livestock. Each recipient stating his own distinct mark. Oh yeah, here he comes again, Braxton Small, the court clerk, even he had to register his marks. Now this was important court business back in 1825. His mark was an underbit in each ear. That's good to know. Another piece of court business was bonding out young children to be apprentices until they were 18. I've seen some records with children as young as 3 years old. Now this entry bonds out two sisters, and it reads in part, in 1825, two sisters, 6 and 7, motherless and abandoned by their father, were bounded out to two men to start, and I love this quote, here's what they were going to be trained on, the art and mystery of spinning, weaving, knitting, and sewing until they are 18. They were bonded out to two men. How men would know about that, I don't know. But anyway, they were bounded out to learn those things in order so when they're 18, they can be an adult and they can take on, maybe find a good husband is what they're thinking of, I'm sure. Now, and this is a sad entry I saw in the court records, and it's hard to believe. An unusual entry was in 1838. It details a $250 reward for a runaway slave. Note how the clerk's hand-drawn picture of the runaway slave, notice how it was no doubt taken from an ad in a lot of the newspapers of the day. There's a newspaper. See how similar they are? Well, slave ads were very common in those. Like in 1838, this one was asking for $150 reward. It's a different reward, but it shows the same style. Now, the McCracken County entry states this, $250 reward for the apprehension and confinement in jail my Negro man Isham, that I get him again. If taken out of state, I will give $100. He left my plantation near Triana, Madison County, Alabama, early in September last. He is of dark complexion, about 35 years, 5 feet 5 or 6 inches high, has a scar on his breast, a slight scar on his underlip, and is a blacksmith by trade. Full prominent eyes, short thick fingers, and rather a hoarse voice. He ran away 2 years since and was committed to jail in Columbia, Tennessee. It is probable that he will attempt to pass through that state again. I will give the above reward for the delivery at my residence. Now, this reward was also appeared in the Nashville Republican Banner, the Memphis Inquirer, and it was signed by a man named Samuel Ragland. It's hard to even imagine such a thing would be part of the local things in the court records. This just shows the atmosphere in 1838, 20 years before the Civil War was to explode on us. Now, due to reoccurring floods, a decision was made on February 13, 1832, to remove the county seat from Wilmington to Paducah. These are records from the Kentucky State Legislature, creating a bill to, as you see, remove the seat of justice of McCracken County from Wilmington to Paducah. There were those who objected to this move, as seen on the bottom of this, because it just says sundry citizens were against this removal. You always have people for and always against. That's the way it's going to be. It stated that appearing to the satisfaction of the court, that $600 be secured to remove the seat of justice of McCracken County from Wilmington to Paducah, and that the county court clerk, gee, I wonder who that would be, Braxton Small, remove the public records and papers belonging to said county, to the said town of Paducah. Now, the court then decided to build a road from Wilmington to Paducah. And it states here that the road should run through several citizens' properties to, quote, the ridge at Perkins Creek at the Indian Mounds. Yeah, there were Indian mounds here in McCracken County. Hence, when the brushy ridge to Paducah, and that the same will pass over much better ground than the way now traveled, and that the said road will pass through the land of William Clark, unquote. Now, I'm sure you all, or many of you, have seen this mural on the flood wall. This is depicting the flood at Wilmington. If you look at the circle there in the background, you'll see, guess who? Braxton Small. Braxton Small oversaw the removal of all the court records, including the ones you just saw. It thrilled me just to know that they were once in Wilmington and were moved during the flood over to Paducah. He removed them in a little skiff, which is a boat. It is said that, and there's a close-up of it, that any time he went fishing, he took all the records with him. He felt they were just as safe with him than at the courthouse. He has been described as a quiet man, stern, and just, with a likable disposition. Well, he was the county clerk there for 30 years, like I said, but he was also the clerk at the Baptist church for the same 30 years. Talk about dual things he's doing here. He died in June of 1869 during a fierce thunderstorm. Now get this, on that night, a bolt of lightning struck both the church and the courthouse, both places where he had faithful service. Was that a message, Braxton? A message from the Almighty. Well, the new courthouse was built in the following manner, as it says here. It was to be a 2-story brick building, 36 feet on each side, with the main door opening on the east side towards the river, and was built for, look at that, $3,049. Well, just under the projected cost of $3,649. And for that day, that was quite an achievement and saved the county $600. It was built at the intersection of Market Street and Court Street. Now, Market Street now, of course, is South 2nd Street. Court Street now is Kentucky Avenue. And obviously, it was named Court Street. I guess we can figure out why. Now, when the courthouse was removed several years later, they named it Kentucky Avenue. The jail was built close to where, right next to the market house. The courthouse continued on that spot for 25 years. And as you can see, I'll see if I can point this out. I don't want to mess up everything here. There it is. Well, you can't really see the laser too much. But see where the courthouse is? This was all open, a big court square. It's not now. You can see the market house. See that little yellow area? Now, the market house was pretty small in that day. It expanded and kept on expanding. This is the third market house we have. So they kept on expanding it. But the courthouse was right smack in the middle of what is now Kentucky Avenue, right? And where like Finkel's is, this building over here would have been where the area where Finkel's is now, and nothing else was around it. So it was literally a court square, which is what most of the old places looked like when they had court squares like that. So they decided in 1858, somebody sold them land at the corner of 6th and Court Street, which is now Kentucky. Do you know who that someone was? Braxton Small. He had his hands in everything. So they wanted a bigger courthouse. Now, many objected to the courthouse as being so far out of town. They didn't want to go that far out of town. Well, the new courthouse was built for a little more than $27,000. Now, here is an etching of the courthouse, which was actually depicted in Harper's Weekly in 1861, just 3 years after it was built. But in 1861, Grant's troops came, 5,000 troops, and everything changed, everywhere, including the courthouse. Now, this court record in October of 1861 reads in part, quote, whereas Paducah is now occupied by the Federal Army and General Smith has determined to take possession of the courthouse of the county as an army hospital, despite the remonstrances of the judge of the county court. It is ordered in the event of such occupation, which it did happen, the court should remove the books and papers to the brick building belonging to Braxton Small. The courthouse was used as a hospital for the Federal Army, but after the war, it was returned to the county and was used for another 80 years. By then, the building was getting pretty antiquated, and it was determined that a new courthouse should be built. Well, progress marches on, and needs change, and so in 1943, a new courthouse was built. This should look a little more familiar to you, at the cost of $330,000. And 1943, that's a lot of money. Well, in 1925, the county celebrated its centennial. The June 27th edition of the News-Democrat devoted the front page, the whole front page, to highlight the centennial. I hope they'll do that this year at least. Activities such as antiques displayed at the courthouse. Let's get some ideas here, Judge. A historical pageant at Cuyler Field. An industrial parade with hundreds of floats. Aerial fireworks. A centennial ball at Wallace Park. And, of course, that Wilmington marker was unveiled. Many activities were on hand to celebrate. Even the local businesses got in on it. There were many centennial sales. Hey, any way to make a buck, right? Such as aluminum percolators for only 75 cents at Hart Lockwood. Ricky's had a sale on silks and dresses, a centennial sale, while Rudy's offered free centennial balloons for the kiddies. And Wiley's had a centennial hose sale. So ladies, you could have got a good centennial hose very cheap. With the establishing of the new county seat and removing of the courthouse to Paducah, McCracken County was officially complete. Now, as we prepare to celebrate the bicentennial, think of all the people who made this possible, such as, who's that? Andrew Jackson, or, well, it tells you, Isaac Shelby, and of course, Braxton Small. You're going to remember that name now. And we don't want to forget Virgil McCracken. There are no known pictures of Virgil McCracken that we could find. And of course, King Chinubby. Now, so let's celebrate the 200th anniversary, the 200th birthday of McCracken by singing what else? Happy birthday. Are we ready? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear McCracken. Happy birthday to you, and many more. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this.